Tennessee started the year number 18 in the coaches poll, number 24 in the AP poll. They were one of 14 schools to beat a Power 5 team over the weekend. They did theirs away from home, which many of them did not do. Yet somehow, despite all of that, they managed to move up 2 spots in the AP poll to number 22 and 1 spot in the coaches poll to number 17. I've got a column up right now. It is a disgrace how low they are. They are, I will say it again, disgracefully low. Now, I want to point out something, which is that I'm going to get called out because in my power rankings, I had Texas A&M, for instance, ahead of Tennessee. That's based on how you're playing and who I would favor on a neutral field to this moment. Tennessee still got to prove a little more because of all the attrition they went through. However, based on straight up resume, it's really hard to do it at the beginning of the year. I understand it because you can't really go on schedule strength because every team is either got a 1,000 winning percentage or a 0 winning percentage. And whatever you have, your opponent has the opposite. So it's just literally a 50-50 either way. So I get it's hard to do. So you somewhat have to weigh things. My way of how you weigh things is, did you beat a team that made the college football playoff last year? Did you beat a Power 4 school? Did you beat an FBS school or an FCS school? Weight them that way. And weight them whether or not you were at home, on the road, or at a neutral site. So when you take those things into account, just straight resume, yes, Tennessee should have moved ahead of Texas A&M, who beat a group of 5 school by less points than Tennessee beat a power at home than Tennessee beat a Power 4 school at a neutral site. I also maintain they should have moved ahead of the Oklahomas, the SMUs, the Michigans, the Floridas, the Arizona States. All these teams beat group of 5 to FCS. I think everybody I named beat FCS schools, by the way, except maybe Michigan. And I don't care how much you beat them by, you should get more credit for beating Syracuse, a Power 4 school. Particularly if you're going to factor in style points this early. I understand that, again. But how can you have them in the AP poll below Texas A&M, like I mentioned, who is number 19, and both rankings have them below Arizona State, who is number 12 in the AP poll, number 10 in the coaches poll. Arizona State beat Northern Arizona 38-19, which is, by the way, the same amount of points that Tennessee beat Syracuse, a Power 4 school, by. So Tennessee beat a Power 4 school at a neutral site by the same amount of points that Arizona State beat an FCS school. How can you justify having Tennessee so far below Arizona State with those facts? You can't. You can't. Look, somebody like Texas, I get it. They lost by a touchdown on the road to the defending national champions. I get it if you don't want to drop them too much. I haven't criticized it too much. Notre Dame lost on the road to a top 25 team, but also a team that just missed the college football playoff last year, and they lost by 3. Fair enough. Clemson lost at home. Because they lost at home, I still think Tennessee should be ahead of them. I don't think it's egregious. I do think it's egregious, though, when Arizona State is ahead of them. I think it's egregious. And again, another team I had ahead of Tennessee in the SEC power rankings, because that's based on what my eyes are telling me, not the actual resume. South Carolina shouldn't be ahead of Tennessee. They beat Virginia Tech at a neutral site. Tennessee beat Syracuse at a neutral site. 2 wins over Power 4 schools. Tennessee won by more. And Syracuse finished last year better than Virginia Tech. South Carolina shouldn't be ahead of Tennessee. That's kind of ridiculous, if I'm being honest. And then the ones that clearly shouldn't be, I'm just going to go down the list. Okay, the ones that clearly should not be ahead of Tennessee. Again, you should be basing this off what you did, off the caliber of the level of play of the school you beat and how much you beat them by. When you take those into account, Penn State, Georgia, both you guys, I'm sorry to both of y'all shouldn't be ahead of Tennessee at this point. Oregon should not be ahead of Tennessee at this point in the season. Okay. South Carolina should not be ahead of Tennessee. Illinois shouldn't be ahead of Tennessee. Arizona State certainly shouldn't be ahead of Tennessee. Now, if you want to factor margin of victory with some of these schools that are beating FCS schools, fine. But if you are going to do that, then Arizona State and Texas A&M are the absolute most egregious, and South Carolina is actually egregious too, because you can't use style points, you can't use where the game was played, and you can't use level of competition, because Tennessee has them beat in all 3 categories. There's no way Tennessee should be behind any of those schools, and having Alabama ahead of Tennessee is beyond atrocious in the AP poll when Alabama lost to Florida State by 2 touchdowns in a game that wasn't even that close, particularly when they leapfrogged Florida State over Tennessee. So here's the question, and the poll question is up. Why were the Vols so low in the AP and coaches poll after blowing out Syracuse? Is it hatred of Tennessee? Or is it laziness because the Vols were already that low to begin with? Or do you think that's where Tennessee belongs? You guys go ahead and vote on that. I'm going to lean it's laziness. I think the polls and the voters are lazy. They didn't watch Tennessee play, and they only watched the marquee games, and they saw, I don't know, Tennessee beat a group of 4 school by 19 points that's not even rated. Oh, I'll just keep them somewhat where they belong, and we'll move them up like a spot or whatever. Okay, that's probably what I think they did. Now, to the voters' credit, they did drop Indiana below Tennessee in the AP poll, but God, that would have been egregious if they didn't. Indiana beat Old Dominion 27-14. How do you not drop Indiana in that situation? That was the right move. But still, the other ones were just flat out egregious and should not have happened. And it's embarrassing that they are that low. Tennessee should be in the top 15. There's no debate they should be in the top 15 in both polls. I'm not saying top 10. I didn't have them in my top 10 because my top 10 goes solely on resume to this point. And in that Tennessee, I think there were higher caliber schools and more impressive wins in different situations for teams that were ahead of them. For instance, I'll be objective. I had Georgia Tech ahead of Tennessee. Again, it's early in the year. Beating an ACC school on a neutral site, is not the same as beating a Big 12 school on the road. Georgia Tech's win was on the road, so I have Georgia Tech ahead of Tennessee. But it's all early. It's all relative. I don't think it's as big of a deal, but I think it's ridiculous when you have Tennessee that low. Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win. Why settle? Banks & Jones up by T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. banksandjones.com.
The poll question up. Why were the Vols so low in the AP and coaches polls after blowing out Syracuse? Hatred of Tennessee, laziness, the Vols are already low, or that's where the Vols belong. Well, 61% of you say hatred of Tennessee. 23% say laziness, the Vols are already low. 16% say that's where the Vols belong. Guys, it was laziness. The Vols are just already that low. They should be higher, so it's laziness. And I'm actually going to tell you a big reason why laziness is being underrated as a big reason for this. And here's why. And it's something not a lot of people are talking about. With the advent of the college football playoff, the polls were already relegated to a certain level of irrelevance. With the college football playoff selection committee, which doesn't come out until November with their rankings. In a 14 playoff, though, they still carried a little bit of weight because 4 and 5 could be really tough to decipher from sometimes. And so the polls and the preseason rankings and that would actually have carry a little bit of influence. In the 12-team playoff, though, where you have 5 automatic bids and conference champions, there is hardly any weight these rankings are pulling because everything's coming down to the college football playoff selection committee, and it's much easier for them to separate schools with their rankings, particularly if they're as lazy as they were last year, the selection committee, that is, where they just went by record and the level of play you're at. Taking those things into account, I think there's a very good chance that poll voters are even lazier this year than they have been in the past, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I don't think I think if you're a coach, for instance, and you got a lot to worry about, you got a lot on your plate, why would you waste your time voting in the the coaches poll when you got a game to prepare for the next week? I just don't think that's something that many people think they want to do. And truth be told, I'm not so sure I blame them either. I mean, I know it's kind of an unfortunate thing to say, but again, I don't think this is something they want to spend their time with anymore. Now, as far as the AP poll, which hates Tennessee even more, look, the same is with the writer. Guys, journalists, I'll just say this to you right now. Their jobs are a lot more intense today than they were 30 years ago. Okay, back in the day in journalism, you could focus on one story, and you'd focus on one story, sometimes 2 to 3 days at a time, to get all the information you needed before you ran with it. And it'd be a 3 to 4 page article. Now you are under the gun to get 3 to 4 articles out in a day. Sometimes if you're a journalist, sports journalist, whoever, and you oftentimes have to shoot your own videos. You have to do all these other things that is really added to the workload. You don't want to waste time voting in these type of AP polls, and you're not watching every game. So that's where I think a lot of this lands, is that I'll just be honest with you. I think the AP poll is the coaches poll. Coaches are way too busy in the season, and the AP poll, AP voters they're not way too busy in the season, but at the same time, they're not more busy. They're not busier in the season than they are in other seasons, but at the same time, they are busy enough where this is just more work than they need to do. And knowing that they don't carry any weight in what they're voting on, they don't want to waste their time doing it. And when you take all that into account, I'll be fair to them. I'm not so sure I can blame them for that. That's the one thing I would say about this whole situation, is that I think AP poll voters and coaches poll voters are too busy to spend their time paying attention to stuff like this when they have more pressing things on their mind, and they know that their vote carries no weight whatsoever.